Somewhere in America right now, a family is packing boxes. They bought their home at the right time, in the right neighborhood, following all the right advice, and they are about to lose most of what they put into it. This is not a story about a market correction. It is not about interest rates or inflation or political leadership. This is about something slower, more structural, and far more permanent. 10 American cities, some of them ones you would never expect, are caught in a collapse that no amount of economic recovery will reverse. Population is leaving and not coming back. Employers are following. Tax bases are hollowing out, and the homeowners who remain are holding assets that the data strongly suggest will be worth significantly less by 2030 than they are today. This video will name them. It will explain why, and it will show the precise forces, demographic, environmental, financial, and structural, that are already in motion. No speculation, no fear-mongering for its own sake, just the data, the trends, and what they point to. These are the 10 cities. Let's start at number 10 and work our way toward the one no one is talking about. Before the list, the context, because without understanding what is driving these collapses, the cities themselves look like isolated bad luck. They are not. The United States is experiencing the largest voluntary internal migration in its modern history. Since 2020, Americans have moved in patterns not seen since the post-World War II suburban expansion, but this time, the direction is different. People are leaving the Rust Belt, yes, that is old news, but they are also beginning to quietly exit parts of the Sun Belt, the Gulf Coast, and the Inland South, regions that were, until very recently, considered the growth destinations of a generation. What is changing is the reason people are leaving. It used to be about jobs, factories closed, the economy moved on. Today, the forces are layered. There is climate risk, rising insurance costs, flooding, heat events. There is fiscal stress, cities running structural deficits they cannot close, deferring infrastructure until it becomes crisis. There is demographic gravity. When a city's median age rises past a certain threshold, the feedback loops that attract young workers, new businesses, and growing tax revenues simply stop working. And underneath all of it, there is the housing market math. In a city with shrinking population and an aging housing stock, there are always more sellers than buyers. Always. And what happens when there are always more sellers than buyers is not complicated. Prices fall. Slowly at first, then, when enough homeowners panic, quickly. The 10 cities on this list are at different stages of that process. Some are early, some are already in the middle of it, and one of them is further along than most of its residents realize. Let's get to the list. Rockford, Illinois sits about 90 miles northwest of Chicago, and for decades it marketed itself as a cheaper alternative for families priced out of the metro. It worked for a while, but the underlying economics of Rockford were always fragile, a manufacturing-dependent labor market in a state that has been hemorrhaging industrial jobs since the 1980s. What makes Rockford's situation particularly difficult is Illinois itself. The state carries one of the worst-funded pension systems in the country. When state finances deteriorate, the pressure transfers directly to municipalities through reduced revenue sharing, through service cuts, through a kind of slow starvation that shows up first in school quality and infrastructure maintenance. Rockford's median home value has tracked well below national averages for years. The question is not whether it is cheap, it is whether cheap is enough of an advantage when the city's structural situation continues to worsen. The data says no. Population declined roughly 8% between 2010 and 2023, with no reversal signal in recent estimates. The jobs base has not diversified at pace, and the homes that do sell slowly. Rockford is not a city in free fall. It is a city in a long, grinding decline, and that kind is often harder to exit than a fast one, because each year the situation looks almost the same as the last. Jackson, Mississippi became national news in 2022 when its water treatment system failed, leaving the state capital of nearly 150,000 people without safe running water for weeks. What the news cycle missed is that the water crisis was not a surprise. It was a symptom of infrastructure that had been deteriorating for decades in a city that could not generate enough tax revenue to maintain it. The core problem in Jackson is a mathematical one. The city has lost nearly a third of its population since 1980. The people who have left tend to be middle and upper income residents who relocated to the suburbs outside city limits, keeping their property taxes with them while still using city infrastructure. What remains is a tax base that is too small to maintain the infrastructure a much larger city built. There is no easy fix to Jackson's structural deficit. New investment requires stability. Stability requires functional infrastructure. Infrastructure requires revenue, and revenue requires a population and economic base that the current trajectory is not producing. The state of Mississippi has intervened in Jackson's water system, but intervention is not the same as a path to solvency. For homeowners, the question is a simple one: who are the buyers? Peoria, Illinois is what researchers sometimes call a mid-sized city trap. Large enough to have expensive infrastructure obligations, not large enough to attract the anchor employers and institutions that sustain those obligations. For most of the 20th century, Peoria meant Caterpillar. The manufacturing giant anchored the local economy, funded civic institutions, and provided the kind of stable employment that built generations of middle-class homeowners. Caterpillar's headquarters moved to Irving, Texas in 2022. The company still employs workers in the region, but the symbolic and economic weight of that decision was not lost on the market. Peoria had already been losing population for over a decade. The headquarters' departure accelerated a perception problem that is now showing up in the housing data. Mid-sized Midwest cities are in a particularly vulnerable position because they lack the diversified economies of major metros and the low overhead simplicity of small towns. They're stuck in the middle, carrying big city costs on a shrinking tax base while competing for residents against both larger cities with more amenities and smaller communities with lower costs. Shreveport, Louisiana built its modern economy on two things: oil and gas revenue and riverboat gambling. Both of those foundations are now eroding. The energy sector has been through sustained volatility, and Shreveport's position as a secondary services hub rather than a major extraction or refining center means it benefits less from energy upswings and suffers more from downswings. The city has the second highest violent crime rate among U.S. cities of its size, a metric that directly suppresses residential property demand, business investment, and the kind of young professional migration that otherwise might arrest decline. Population has fallen by more than 15% since 2010, a rate that places Shreveport among the fastest shrinking southern cities in any recent measurement period. There is a version of the Shreveport story that involves diversification, arts-led urban renewal, and technology investment. That version has been written in local news for 20 years. The data on population and home values does not yet reflect any of those narratives taking hold at scale. Hartford, Connecticut presents what might be the most counterintuitive entry on this list. Connecticut is one of the wealthiest states in the country, home to the insurance industry's national headquarters, to Yale University, to hedge fund wealth concentrated in Fairfield County. And yet Hartford, the state capital, sitting in the middle of all of that, has been on the edge of municipal bankruptcy for the better part of a decade. The reason is a structural one that repeats itself in various American cities: suburban incorporation. The wealthy communities surrounding Hartford, West Hartford, Glastonbury, Simsbury, Avon, incorporated separately, keeping their property tax revenue, while the city retained its legacy infrastructure, its poverty concentration, and its obligations. Hartford's grand list, which is the total assessed value of taxable property in the city, is among the lowest per capita in New England. Connecticut provided a significant financial rescue to Hartford in 2017, essentially assuming a substantial portion of the city's debt obligations. That rescue stabilized the situation without resolving the structural math. For homeowners inside city limits, values have remained chronically depressed relative to the surrounding suburbs, not because the location is inherently undesirable, but because the fiscal situation creates a persistent uncertainty discount that the market has never been willing to ignore. Memphis, Tennessee is frequently cited in cost of living comparisons as one of the most affordable major cities in the United States. That framing is technically accurate and substantively incomplete. Memphis is cheap to enter, expensive to remain in, because the city's cost of living calculations rarely